property taxes to supporting the African American schools rather than their property taxes supporting the white schools. And essentially this is the public school system in Delaware, much like it's supported today, was supported through real estate taxes. And African Americans paid real estate taxes, but those taxes went to support the white schools rather than the African American schools, which were supported by private charitable organization. And in 1874, a group of African Americans met here in Dover at the Whitecoat Methodist Episcopal Church on Slaughter Street, which is now a Baptist church, and held a convention. And that convention came out with some demands. One demand was for Delaware to support the pending Civil Rights Bill in Congress, which later became the 1875 Civil Rights Act, and also demanded that the legislature pass a law that would allow African Americans to keep their taxes to support their schools. And eventually the state of Delaware did pass legislation in the 1880s that provided public support for the African American schools. Now with that said, the next challenge was get the tax collector to actually collect the taxes. And for a variety of reasons, many of the county tax collectors would not collect taxes on African American property. One reason why they didn't collect taxes and then eventually inform the property owner that you may lose your property to a sheriff's auction was to keep them from voting, poll taxes. And if you didn't own property, you were required to pay a poll tax to vote. And if you owned property, that meant that you were a property owner and could vote. But if you weren't paying your taxes, you couldn't vote. So this was a way to disfranchise African American voters in the state. The other was to, the taxes, of course, supported the local education system. And with opposition to educating African Americans anyway, not collecting the taxes would mean that they would possibly not be able to conduct school in the local area. One incident occurred in the 1880s in Odessa, which is not far from Dover. It's a little community to the north of Dover. A group of African American men came together, and because they were having a difficult time finding the Newcastle County tax collector to pay their taxes for their property. And they knew if they didn't pay their taxes what that would mean. They could lose their right to vote, they could lose their property, and above all else, they couldn't support their schools for their children. So the group got together and they tracked down where the tax collector was. He'd actually left the state and gone to Philadelphia for business. So they found out where he was staying. They traveled to Philadelphia to his hotel. They knocked the door down and entered the door, and by gunpoint forced the tax collector to collect their taxes. That's how important education was to African Americans in the late 19th century and continues to be so.
Now listen carefully and see if you can find the scandal in this statement.
We received a letter dated July 9th, 2012, stating that we had been approved to receive our tax exemption. Wetumpka Tea Party filled out a complete application. Our organization fell within the boundaries of receiving a 501c4 status. Yet, our application was singled out solely because we had Tea Party in our name.
That was the founder of the Wetumpka, Alabama Tea Party, one of the witnesses at today's Ways and Means Committee hearing in the House of Representatives. Of course, no Republican member found the scandal in that statement. Neither has anyone in the Washington media, but every viewer of this program, including Texas Democratic Congressman Lloyd Doggett, knows exactly what is scandalous about what IRS agents did with 501c4 applications.
I don't believe that the Internal Revenue Service, the Treasury Department, should be providing tax subsidies to organizations that are not engaged exclusively in social welfare. This Congress was very clear on that point, clear on it in 1913 and in repeated recodifications of what is now 501c4. It said that they must be operated exclusively for the promotion of social welfare.
And more lawmakers are now talking about that scandal that we've been telling you about from day one.
Having organizations parading as being social welfare organizations and then being involved in the political combat harkens back to why the statute 100 years ago said that they were prohibited, and why I wholeheartedly agree with my colleague, Mr. Doggett, saying we ought to stop this regulation interpretation from 1959.
Since the House Republicans don't understand the real scandal or its remedy, which is simply to enforce the law as written, today they instead gave the opportunity for conservative activists to go before television cameras and define the scandal themselves.
This dialogue is about the jackboot of tyranny upon the field of our founding documents.
Many of the agents and agencies of the federal government do not understand that they are servants of the people. They think they are our masters, and they are mistaken.
To whisper the letters IRS strikes a shrill note on Main Street, USA. But when this behemoth tramples upon America's grassroots, few hear the snapping sounds.
I feel like our country has turned a corner into tyranny.
I'm not here as a serf or a vassal. I'm not begging my lords for mercy.
Check the power of the executive branch, because in so doing you will protect, defend and preserve human liberty.
Okay, so jackboot of tyranny, lie. Let's see, tramples on America's grassroots, lie. Our country has turned a corner into tyranny, lie. And no one at today's hearing threatened in any way by possible charges of perjury by those truth seekers on the Republican side of that panel. Joining me now is Oregon Democratic Congressman Earl Blumenauer, a member of the House Ways and Means Committee. Thanks for joining us tonight, Congressman.
My pleasure.
How lonely is it up there when you're having a hearing about abuse of law in the Ways and Means Committee and you cannot get Republicans of the committee to actually read the very simple language of the 501c4 law?
Well, it's frustrating. Obviously, there were some problems in inappropriate targeting, and if there looks like there were some confidential tax returns leaked, by all means, go after it. Get to the bottom of it. But we've had the Inspector General's report. There's no wrongdoing, nothing's willful, nothing criminal. There have been some mistakes made, but as you've been getting to, the underlying problem is that we shouldn't have bureaucrats trying to evaluate how much social welfare versus how much political action they're involved with. The statute says they shouldn't have any. The Eisenhower-era reinterpretation that allowed some permissible political activity was wrong. It's contrary to the statute. Congress should fix it. If they want to play politics, they ought to organize a political effort. They shouldn't be shielded from public disclosure by the 501c4 status, where they get millions of dollars and not required to disclose. And they are definitely principally organized, like the National Organization for Marriage was organized to assault efforts in California for marriage equality. It's blatantly political, and we shouldn't pretend otherwise. We should stop it.
Congressman, has Janice Mays and her wizards on the staff of the Ways and Means Committee figured out why in 1959 the Eisenhower IRS changed in a regulation the word exclusively to the word primarily, and why then the IRS relied on the word they made up instead of the word Congress wrote?
Yeah, I am not familiar with anybody teasing out the history on that. It would be interesting, but actually, I think a sideshow. The point is, it's inappropriate, it's contrary to statute, and it leads us down this never land path that ends up, and I don't care whether it's an organization on the right or the left, they shouldn't disguise political action behind the guise of social welfare. It's not healthy, it's not right, it's not legal. We should stop it.
Let's listen to how deep the ignorance runs on the Republican side on this, what Aaron Schock had to say today.
We're not having a debate about whether or not we agree with Citizens United. We're not having a debate about whether or not we want to change 501c3 or change 501c4 processes. I would submit to you that if that is your goal, perhaps introduce legislation to do so.
So, Congressman, he clearly did not hear or understand what you had to say today. He clearly does not have the vaguest idea what 501c4 law actually says, which is none of those people should have had their applications approved, and in fact, none of them had them denied.
Yeah, absolutely right. Absolutely right. And it is largely, I think, an effort on the part of some of our friends on the committee to try and conjure up something that's far more sinister. You recall really inflammatory language that was used by the majority in the committee on the very first hearing about corruption and government picking who they're going to support, that it's a corrupt system. In fact, the Inspector General acknowledged, found that there were problems, but there was no criminal wrongdoing. It wasn't sort of a willful effort to try and be disruptive. We need to be mindful of what's going on there. It's a little bizarre that the Republicans have had a consistent assault against the Internal Revenue Service. They have dramatically reduced the budget. There's about 25,000 fewer people who work at the IRS today than when they assumed power back in 1995, even as they have made the tax code more complex, and there are millions of more people filing returns. I think it's an unfortunate item. I hope we can zero in on this one little item, however, and that is get the IRS out of this completely by making it clear that the illegality is not going to be tolerated and get rid of that regulation.
Great. Congressman Earl Blumenauer, thank you very much for telling the truth in that hearing today, and thanks for joining us tonight.
My pleasure.
Right.